It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Astronauts Neil A. Armstrong, Edwin E. Aldrin, and Michael Collins, the three men who will make the next and most historic round trip to the moon. Command pilot for this first landing, astronaut Neil Armstrong. It will be Armstrong who steps cautiously out onto the moon for the first time.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
The Kennedy prophecy became reality in less than a decade when 3 American astronauts blasted off from a space station bearing his name to begin a 240,000-mile trek to the moon. The Voyagers watched Earth from afar as millions of Earthlings were given a guided tour of the universe by a business-as-usual crew. The world was witness, too, at that historic moment when the crew's commander, Neil Armstrong, descended to the surface of another world and took one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind.
One giant leap for mankind.
This had been building throughout the 1960s, so people were expecting it. But even so, it was an absolutely stupendous achievement, and people couldn't really believe it was happening.
1969 opened with the inauguration of Richard M. Nixon as the 37th President of the United States. With a small margin of victory, he faced great challenges: a war in Vietnam, racial division, youthful unrest, and a changing moral climate at home. Vietnam was the chief issue. The student demonstrations were the same as last year, except now the signs read Nixon instead of Johnson. In June, the president tried to meet the issue when he ordered a partial troop withdrawal. But there were still 450,000 troops in Vietnam, continuing the day-to-day job of fighting the war. Generally, the pace of combat slowed. Nudity in movies and on stage becomes an ever more common feature of the new culture. It all started with a youth-oriented, hippie-style musical called Hair. Drugs, especially marijuana, became a major problem in 1969. The shortage of marijuana was not apparent at the Woodstock, New York, Summer Music Festival. Almost 500,000 young people gathered for a generally peaceful but monumentally disorganized weekend.
'69 was a pivotal year in many respects. If we're looking at the pop movement, the Summer of Love, 1967, that had kind of started to crumble away in '68. Things were getting pretty serious in '69. There were deaths at some rock festivals. There was the Vietnam War going from bad to worse. There were riots on some of the streets in the United States. So there were some pretty grim things going on while we were achieving this monumental project of landing human beings on the moon.
Columbia, this is Houston, over.
Well, the strange thing is that even when humans were landing and walking on the moon, they were thinking about Earth. They were looking back at this very small orb in the sky, blue and green. It was beautiful in this inky blackness. And they started thinking about the Earth. And in the decades since, that's what we've been doing when we think about Apollo. Now, the computing power that had to take astronauts to the moon and back is less than you'd have probably in a chip in your washing machine. It's very small indeed, but of course back then it did the job, and it was at the cutting edge of technology. So we shouldn't we shouldn't denigrate what was being achieved back then.
It was amazing to me to see them looking back at the Earth. The Earth looks so small from the moon, and it's exciting to see what the Earth looks like from outer space.
Well, I was 2 years old at the time, so probably didn't watch it at the time, but I have seen since then.
Quite astounding, actually, and almost unbelievable. You know, the way that it happened. You just think, you know, something like that has come from the Earth to go up there.
A lot of people talk about going to Mars as the next step beyond the moon. Personally, I don't think it's going to happen for a very long time. I'd be very surprised, if I lived that long, if it was to happen this century.
3, 2, 1. Main engine ignition and liftoff of the Atlas V rocket with LRO Albatross, America's first step of a lasting return to the moon.